Hey, I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and other media outlets, and this is the Onto Something podcast. And Rene Ingoglia is set to join me today, ESPN football analyst who also works simultaneously right now as a civilian investigator into cold case homicides. As many are aware, this is a sports media podcast. We're not just talking X and O's about work. Sure, we'll dive into that stuff, but we're going to go in depth about his personal life and his family life, and he's going to share stories that he normally doesn't, learn things about him that even his closest friends wouldn't know. That is the premise of these conversations I have. And before we get started, if you feel so compelled, and I hope you do, please subscribe. Here is my chat with Rene. Well, they talk about being a dual threat as a quarterback in football, but what about a dual threat who's a running back turned now football analyst on television / civilian investigator for cold case homicides? Yes, Rene Ingoglia joins me, and we're going to share his story here on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and other media outlets. Rene, I know that you know how this works, where we go beyond just work and we learn about you as a father. We learn about those personal stories. And I know I've had a lot of your friends, a lot of your colleagues, a lot of your bosses on. So it was only a matter of time until we got you on. Thanks for doing this.
It's an honor to be on with you, Bryan. And as I told you before we started recording, I love that you do these and you learn a lot about people. So honored that you gave me a call and wanted to do this.
Well, I got a feeling we're going to learn a lot about you in this conversation. You, obviously, as an ESPN analyst and a Hall of Fame running back at UMass, know what it takes to make it in sports. So what is it like for you being a sports dad and watching your kids? And what's your approach to them?
It's hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with. So I have a soon-to-be 20-year-old that's a sophomore at Lynn University. It's a Division II school. She plays soccer, Sunshine State Conference here in Florida. And so she was kind of the first one. And I tell you, it's hard because watching your child play and then trying to give your child guidance and advice when they don't want to take it because they're like, Dad, you played football. You don't know about soccer, and you just kind of, bite your tongue. But she's gotten better, the older one. And then I have a senior that plays in high school right now. And so, yeah, it's tough, but I just try to give them now because I, as a parent, I'm learning too, right? You're a former athlete and you got kids and they play sports and you think like you have all the answers. You don't. But so I've learned a lot from them too. And I'll be honest, I used to be one of those yellers, right? I guess it depends who you ask if I was an annoying yeller or not. And really, I used to yell more for motivation for my kids, but it turns out it didn't really work the way I would envision maybe what pushed me. So now I just sit back, I watch. If I do say something, it's under my breath, and that's it. And so it's been good. I've learned a lot about being a parent with a child or a couple children playing sports. So that's actually been very fascinating for me.
So we're learning about your motivational tactics for others. What about you? How do you motivate yourself? And how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah. So, I always, I grew up in an era, I'm not really going to get off my long guy, but I guess maybe I'm getting there. I grew up in the 80s where, you didn't have arcade games. You didn't have really cable TV. You obviously didn't have phones or computers or anything. You were just out playing every day. And I played all three sports: football, basketball, baseball, whatever season it was. That's what I played. And I'm the youngest of five. So obviously I got pushed into playing with all older kids, which really I credit to helping me succeed in football. And just it toughens you up. And you play tackle football. There's no two-hand touch. Doesn't matter if you're on the street, you were tackling. And so you just played all day, and then you'd hear your mom yelling. You'd come home when it's dark, and that's what you did. And so I just thrived on trying to be the best at whatever sport I did. And at the end of the day, though, you have to inherently want that. That has to kind of be built in you. It's nothing. My parents didn't play sports; they didn't push me to it. It's just something that I love to do, and it's hard today because I see it with my kids. There's so much more stuff that's going on in our world. And I do see from covering college football and actually in covering high school football with ESPN, I just did Under Armour you do get those kids, those kind of the throwbacks, I like to say, that are really invested in what they're doing. Because at the end of the day, I tell my kids also the biggest thing is, and it's a cliche, but it's so true. It's not what you do when people are watching you; it's what you do when no one's watching you. So if you can, I was one of those guys, in eighth, ninth grade, I would put my Walkman on because that's what we had, a big Walkman, right? And the headphones, and I'd go run hills because guess what? That's what Walter Payton did when I was a kid. And you just emulate these guys, and you condition, and you play the sport, and you just try to get better. And it's not like I tell my daughters also, you just don't show up at your club practice or your team practice and expect that is going to be good enough if you want to excel at the sport. If you don't want to excel at the sport and you're just playing for fun, I get it, right? You show up to your practices, but I mean, if you want to be the best of the best, you have to do all the little things by yourself, working out, lifting the weights, running, watching film, and doing those things. Because there's so many kids out there, especially like when you're talking about trying to earn a scholarship, so many kids out there that want a scholarship as well, that are working hard. And so you're not just kind of training to get better against maybe the region that you live in or the state you live in. It's really nationwide.
As you were scaling those hills with a Walkman, what are you listening to?
Oh boy, just mixtapes. That's what we had back there. Rap wasn't big back then, like in the '80s. So, rock. I'm not really heavy metal, but like I was a big U2 fan actually growing up. So a lot of U2 and that kind of music. So
A little eclectic,
yeah.
whatever it takes to sort of get you in the right mood. Rene Ingoglia is with me, of course, ESPN analyst, UMass Hall of Fame running back. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and other outlets. When you think about your impact and your cachet just in football, I know you have another job and we'll touch on that in a moment, but just in the world of football, what do you want to be known most for? ESPN analyst or big-time college football player and Hall of Famer at UMass?
I think it actually all blends together in one. I think I couldn't have succeeded in any of them without the other one, if that makes sense. So even at UMass, before and it's a fascinating story how I got to ESPN, and I'm sure you'll ask me about that. But even before I was going to get into the broadcasting world, I needed my football background and what I learned playing the game that I love to be the analyst and broadcaster that I am today. And I didn't know it back then, but you need it. And that's, Bryan, that's what I love about football. I know I'm biased, but I tell people football is the best sport in the world because you're constantly learning life lessons when you don't even realize you're learning them. And that's why when you're in high school and you're in college, you're 18 to 22, things are happening in football that will eventually mirror life when you get older, and you don't realize it at the time, but you're going to run into obstacles and you're going to come back to something a coach told you or taught you, or an issue you had, or maybe you got beat out for a starting role. And football imitates life, and it's life lessons. And that's why I will always love the game of football. It's given so much to me that I try to give back really now with my broadcasting.
What are those life lessons that you didn't see at the time or you learned afterwards and not in the moment when you were devoting yourself to breaking into the broadcasting space and the extremes you would go about getting your name out there and seeing this passion through?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So and I'm probably going to jump ahead, and I apologize, but you can slow me down and stop if I kind of get off kilter. So, I like to tell people I had a cup and a half of coffee in the NFL. I played with the Buffalo Bills for a couple of years, practice squad in the mid to late 80s. I was with the Washington Redskins back then, Commanders now, practice squad. And then in 99, I went and played NFL Europe, and I played for the Frankfurt Galaxy. And I knew when I went over there, I wasn't getting back in the NFL. It was kind of like a last hurrah for me. And so we ended up winning the World Bowl. Jake Delhomme was our quarterback. I got to score a touchdown in the last game I ever played in. We won, got a nice ring out of it. So I said, it's a pretty good way to go out from the game I love. And I knew at that time that I wanted to get into law enforcement. And people said, why law enforcement? Well, again, I was a kid that grew up in the 80s. I wanted to do two things. I wanted to be a professional football player, and I wanted to be a police officer. So, I feel so blessed that I've actually been able to live those dreams out. And so when I came back, from NFL Europe. Long story short, I get hired by the Orlando Police Department, and eventually had a 20+ year career there. But in the middle of that career, which I loved, it's a great career, I really missed football. So my wife said, why don't you, coach and help out high school? And at this point as well, I have 2 children. So it's not like I can just say, I'm going to get into the college profession, because anyone that knows college coaching, I mean, you're fired, you're moving, you're up, you're that. And so, I wasn't able to give up this profession. So my wife said, why don't you help out coach locally? And I did. I helped out Pop Warner and some high schools, but I just still missed it at a higher level. And then in 2007, you had mentioned I'm in the UMass Hall of Fame. So in 2007, I get inducted into the UMass Hall of Fame. I go up there, and the ceremony's on a Friday night, and there's a football game on Saturday. So I was the guest at halftime of the football game. The voice of UMass at the time was a guy by the name of Bob Beeler, who's now the voice of Boise State. And I still talk to Bob today. It's the first time, Brian, I had put headphones on. I had never put headphones on ever. And I did this extended interview at halftime, and I came out of the press box and I was like, I really liked talking about football. I said, man, this is something I think maybe I could do. And so I come back to Orlando, and now I'm a young detective at the time. And I just kind of scour the internet, and I'm like, all right, let me see if I know anybody out there that might know me in broadcasting. And basically, long story short, I come in, and I'm not going to say the name because I don't know if he would be okay with it. It's a person at ESPN, and I send him a cold email. So I was a detective, so I figured his email was his first name dot last name at ESPN.com. So I send this person a cold email, and he answered me. And to this day, that's why I will always answer people's emails, DMs, and give them the best advice I can. I tell them I might not be able to help you, but I'll give you the best advice I can. I never blow off anyone, because for you to succeed, especially in the broadcasting business, someone has to help you along the way. It's just the way the business is, and I know you know that. So this person, I reached out to him and said, yeah, I'd love to try to help you. So a CP, a coordinating producer that worked under this person, reached out to me and said, hey, I was told to give you a call. Hey, can you send me your demo? And I said, yeah, don't really have a demo. Didn't really know how it worked. Didn't know if I could audition. They said, no, we really need a demo. If you can just get one, it can be high school, whatever. I said, okay. And now I live in Orlando, and I don't really have the connections here. I'm from Rochester, New York. And so that year kind of goes by the wayside into 2008. And I'm still really intrigued with it. And it's something I think I could be good at. And I stayed in touch with that person that I reached out to. And then I finally just called UMass up, and I said, listen, I want to get into broadcasting. So I would love to join the UMass Sports Network. I'm not looking to get anyone fired or anything. I just want to join the network and see if I can, do this broadcasting. And they said, are you serious? And I said, yeah. They said, we would love to have you, but we can't, it's the UMass Sports Network. We can't afford to fly you from Orlando to Massachusetts and so forth. I said, don't worry about it. I've already talked to my boss, i.e. my wife, and she said, go for it. So basically, I basically maxed out a credit card and ended up being now the 2009 season. Maxed out a credit card, and I didn't even tell at the time the Orlando Police that I was doing it. Like I said, I was a young detective. I worked Monday through Friday as a detective, and then every Friday night, Southwest Airlines had the cheapest flight. They had an 8:00 flight from Orlando to Manchester, New Hampshire. So I flew that flight every Friday, and then I would rent a car in Manchester and drive it the hour and a half to Amherst. And then a good buddy of mine, who's a former teammate, Dan Markowski, who was an associate AD there at the time. I would go to his house. We'd have a soda pop. I get there about midnight, and we'd shoot the breeze for 20 minutes or whatever, have a beer, and then I'd go sleep in his basement. And then I'd get up and go call the game, and then fly home Sunday, go back OPD, do my police work, and just did that whole season. And then on away games, I would fly to their city and rendezvous, if they were playing Richmond on the road. And so I did that the entire season. And so it's funny because people ask, did you get paid? I said, yeah, they ultimately paid me, I think $100 a game, but it was costing me about $600 or $700 a game in flights and rental cars and food. So, but I knew that. And like I said with my wife, I said it jokingly, but it was a serious conversation. That was a paid, I invested in myself there. And I had people saying, you're crazy to do that, but you either believe in yourself or you don't. And at the end of that season, I had a demo. Now, it was a radio demo, but it was a demo nonetheless. And I went back to that person, right, at ESPN. And then ultimately that demo got sent to my first boss at ESPN, who's no longer there, a guy by the name of Stas Hall, who obviously my first boss, love him, great admiration for him, really helped me where I am today. And then that next year after that demo, I did 3 games on ESPN3, got no feedback, which is funny because everyone said no news is good news. And then the following year, which was 2011, full slate of games on ESPN3. I think I did 12 games. And then 2012 started doing some national stuff, some national high school stuff. And then there was syndication still back then in 2012, Big East Network. And then in 2013 was probably my first big break at ESPN. They gave me the full national high school package with Adam Amin, who now Adam's a superstar. And it's funny because my 20-year-old in college, whenever she sees Adam doing an NFL game on Fox, she always texts me because she likes to bust my chops. She says, Dad, I'm watching Adam. How did he become a superstar and you didn't? So, always real digging at me. But in a nutshell, that's kind of how I got into ESPN, and then just kind of, moving my way up. And the other thing, and I know you know this, Brian, but if there's aspiring broadcasters out there, I tell people all the time, like, there's a fine line between being persistent and a pain in the ass. Okay. And you have to find that line. I can't tell you where it is, but if you cross it and you become a pain in the ass, then CPs, production people, they're not going to email you back. They're not going to contact you back, but you also can't fall off their radar. And so I was pretty good at finding that line. And once the proverbial door opens and you get through it, you got to be able to succeed. And the other thing, this is me. This is 13 years now I've been with ESPN. I never say no. I just don't. It doesn't matter. I mean, I love football, so I would never complain about assignments. You'd be surprised. People complain about assignments. It doesn't matter if and I did Division III national championship year. Love it. It doesn't matter. I want to call college football games. So that's another advice I give people too. Don't say no. If you get an opportunity, because they're just going to go to the next person.
I love what you said there, Rene, about the art of reaching out, because it's such a feel-out process. And the other thing is, the person on the receiving end, some love the persistence and they're like, they take a liking to that. And others, like you said, it can be seen as a pain in the butt. And it's like, this is too much. So a lot of it is reaching out differently or having a different tactic based upon the person and how you think they're going to react. And I think
Sure.
that just comes with experience. And certainly you've mastered that. Rene Ingoglia is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. So here you are. You've made it now at ESPN. But to say that you would have made it without, and you said it, your boss, your wife, where does she stand in the picture here of the factor, the role that she played in allowing you to do this?
It would have never happened without my wife, because I had 2 young children. So 13 years ago, so I had at the time like a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. So, but she said, listen, go for it, go for your dream. And she was behind me the entire way. And again, I'm gone on weekends, right? I mean, I'm flying on Friday nights. I'm not home till Sunday. And then I'm a full-time detective Monday through Friday. A lot going on there. So, I mean, love her dearly. We've been married, it'll be 21 years now. And she doesn't get enough credit, because she deserves more credit for this 13-year career I've had with ESPN, because, again, without her, it would not have happened. Now, I did pay it back. So she is, I should say, so she's a huge Alabama fan. So she was born and raised here in Central Florida, but she has family in Alabama. So she spent a lot of summers in Alabama. So she's not a fair weather Alabama fan. She's always been an Alabama fan. She also has a degree from UCF, so she's UCF fan too, but she's Alabama through and through. So a few years ago, the 2017 season, she knew Bama was good, and she said, hey, if they make it to the championship, because the championship game was in Tampa Bay, it was at Raymond James. So she said, hey, if they get in, can you get some tickets? So I did. I got tickets. They went, but that was the epic game where Clemson beat them last second of the game. We were right in that corner of that end zone, right where they where Clemson beat them. But she went to a national championship game, so it was a good time. Too bad Alabama didn't win for her, but that was her one thing. She said, "I just want to go to an Alabama game." So
How did she take the loss?
she was great. She's actually really good with it. So not my 20-year-old now. Go back, what was she, 15 at the time, 14? She didn't take it well because obviously mom's an Alabama fan. She's an Alabama fan. So she did not take it well. But my wife did. She was great with it. She gets it. So she takes games much better than I do, and I don't even have a rooting interest. Obviously, I root for my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts, which has been tough lately. But I yell at the TV constantly just in general because I'm an analyst, I think, and things that I see. And that's just kind of how I do. So my family looks at me like I'm crazy anyway because I'm constantly yelling at the TV for all different stuff. So they're used to me.
How is being a detective, working on cold case homicides, having to really dig up information, research in unique ways, how has that made you, in a roundabout way, a better analyst, football-wise?
Yeah, so it's a great question because the two careers probably couldn't be farther apart, but yet they're not. So the great thing about it is, when I get into broadcasting, it's a whole different world of what I was investigating. And for the majority of my career, so I said I was with ESPN for 13 years. So for a little over 10 of that, I was a violent crimes detective specializing in robbery. So I was a robbery detective. So bank robberies, home invasions, carjackings, person robberies. So one thing as a detective, you're constantly talking to people, right? You're talking to witnesses, you're talking to victims, you're talking to suspects. So you're good in that communication. And the other thing is too is like you can't talk over people as a detective. And so you're talking to people and sometimes at different levels. And so I try to be an analyst like that. I don't try to say, well, it's 11 personnel here and use a lot of jargon. And a lot of analysts do. Now, I will use jargon like that, but I always explain what it means. Because again, a lesson my wife taught me. I was doing a game, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and I said, "Hey, they're in a 40 front, meaning 4 down linemen, defensive linemen, 40 front defensively." And she texted me, she's like, "I don't know what the hell that means." So now I know to explain it because the majority of people watching aren't the hardcore buddies that we may have that have a better understanding. It's people that just like to enjoy college football. And to that point, I've had a lot of friends say, "You know what? I never really paid attention to the broadcasters until I knew you did it." And so now they pay attention a little bit more. So I try to speak to the audience at a level where I'm not dumbing it down, but just saying a level where they can enjoy the game. You can maybe enhance it a little bit because at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer, Brian. Some people might beat me up over this. No one cares who the announcers are. I'm sorry. Okay. It's the game. It's the game. Okay. And so you could slide some announcers in certain big time games. You're still going to get big time ratings. That's just my opinion. Okay. So I think as announcers, we try to add to the game. Play by play, obviously, as you know, is different than the analyst. So we add where our expertise is. But at the end of the day, get out of the way and let the game play and let people enjoy it. So that's kind of what I try to do as an analyst.
And thinking about the ratings, if your wife had a rating sheet as to what you do on a broadcast that she rates the highest, that you do the best out of any other thing, what would she say?
She knows that my pet peeve is knowing the rules, and it drives me nuts and I get it. You're not going to know. I don't know every rule. You're not going to know every rule. But as an analyst, I believe it's incumbent upon you to have a really good working knowledge of the rules. And guess what? If something comes up in a game and you don't know it, don't guess. Don't guess. Just sit back and let the referee go through it. Now they've gotten, my crews never get them, but now you get rules analysts, rules experts. They'll sit with you. I don't have that luxury at the packages I do, which is fine because, like I said, to me, I take pride in knowing the rules. And so she knows that. So she knows that when weird stuff happens, I like to be able be able to hit the rule. And so it's not a hard rule, but it's one that people forget. Like I did the Cheez-It Bowl for ESPN National Radio last week, and there was a false start, less than a minute left in the game. The clock was running. Boom, I immediately know, okay, this comes with a 10-second runoff. And I just know that naturally. And, my partner, my play-by-play partner, Mike Morgan, looked at me and I said, yeah, it's 10-second runoff. I'm a nerd, a rules nerd. And he's like, yeah, partner, you're on the money. You're right. And they made the call. So that's just one of the things that I do, and so you have other analysts like a Dan Orlovsky who's just really in tune with offenses and systems. And of course, the Tony Romo can tell you the play. I can't do that stuff. But I think every analyst, we all bring something different to the game. And that's what's unique about the position of an analyst, because we all have different experiences in the game. So just a roundabout way, knowing the rules and I try to, again, get out of the way and not talk too much. Sometimes it can be hard in certain games, but yeah, that's it.
Rene Ingoglia is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley, ESPN analyst, of course, UMass Hall of Fame running back. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and other outlets. What about, there's something you get out of football. There is something that feels validating, whether it's playing, whether it's, doing a little bit of coaching, and then obviously all that you do in the broadcasting space that gives you your sense of self. But what doesn't football give you that working in the police department does and has?
So it's interesting. And so you went back to your question about the two careers. So the other thing I would tell you is in football, and I talked about life lessons, right? There's 11 guys on the field at once, let alone all your teammates. You have to work as a cohesive unit, right? To be productive in offense or defense or special teams, right? Very similar in law enforcement because, I was on a robbery unit where there's a bunch of us working together. We've done stakeouts together. I was on a tactical unit where you need each other. Like certain people have to do certain things if you take down a car or you do a felony stop on an armed suspect. So that part is very similar. And I think football helped me become a really good police officer in that aspect of getting along. And the camaraderie. The one thing, you miss as a football player is just the locker room in that, the brotherhood. And I always say this too. And, if you watch the news and society and, there's some angst out there, some people that don't get along and it's sometimes can be just, sad. And I always say if society could just be like just a portion of how a locker room gets together and melts, doesn't matter your race, your background in terms of you came from money or you came poor, your religious background, none of that matters in a football locker room. At least it never did when I played. It just never mattered. Just the only thing that mattered was you knew you guys had a common goal. And so I wish sometimes society could be a little bit more like a locker room, and maybe we'll get back to that. So I miss that, and that kind of, but that helped me with law enforcement as well. And so they both kind of, again, in a nice way, helped each other out in my careers.
In your police career, courage, that has to be a big part of it, and bravery. And how have you had to put yourself out there? And you talked about those situations.
So I think about my life more now that I'm a retired detective, and now I'm back as a civilian investigating cold cases, but it's nothing like I used to do. When you're a young cop, it's like, oh, this is going to be fun. I ride in a police car, and it is, right? It's you're a young man and young person. You want to do it, and you don't think about your life, and you think about doing the job to the best of your ability. And then kids come into the question, come into the area and married, and all of a sudden, I had a chief back in the day, and he said, listen, the most important thing is that you go home to your family at night. And I always policed like that. I did, the best I could, but I knew in the back of my mind, I'm going to go home at night to my family. And so I was fortunate enough and blessed enough that I did over 20 years, came home every night. And it's just, and it's tough because I've seen how society has changed from a rookie officer moving up the ranks into a detective, into a senior detective, and now retired. the way there's kind of, there's obviously a lack of respect for law enforcement in this country. There's no doubt about it. But there's a lack of respect for authority in this country. You see teachers are disrespected a lot more. Elders, any person that's elderly, that has great experience, seems to be disrespected. And so, I think, again, here we go, get off my lawn guy. Growing up in the 80s, it's just a little different. And I'm a firm believer, and I told someone this the other day, whether it's crime, whether it's I'm not going to fight for my job in a college football team. I'm just going to jump in the transfer portal because that's, it's not me, it's the coaches. So I'm going to leave. And anything you do in life comes from within the home, how you're raised. That's just my opinion, right? If you're raised a certain way, you're gonna do things a certain way, and that's just my opinion. My parents, I owe a lot to my parents. Like I said, my parents did not play sports. My father's got like an 8th grade education. That's it. He was a construction worker his whole life, self-made man. My parents are still alive, still married. They've been married 63 years. I hope I just make it to 63. They've been married 63 years. Never pushed me, but instilled those values within the home that just make, at the end of the day, just be a good person, right? And work hard. And the one thing I try to tell my kids all the time, you have to work hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? And things in life aren't easy, especially if you want to be a high-level athlete. And again, though, but that's those life lessons I talked about, Brian, because if you work hard in your sport to be elite, well, whatever walk of life you get into, whether it's law enforcement, whether you become a lawyer, you get into the medical profession, you become a mailman, construction worker, I don't care. If you have that ability, that work ethic that you use in sports, it will carry over into whatever profession you have, broadcasting, right? It's going to help you get along with people better. So sports, and again, football to me is the ultimate, but sports in general, those life lessons I think are invaluable for you as you move on. Listen, it'll make you, me in particular, it's made me a better father, a better husband, a better person, from those life lessons I talked about. And so, and I touched on something, and you didn't bring it up, I did. This transfer portal thing. So to me, I get it why some people want to transfer. I totally understand it. But boy, I think we live in a culture where we have, and I was just at Under Armour here at ESPN, and these kids are the best of the best, right? And by far, they are the best players in their region, in their state, in their conferences. So they get to Under Armour, and this is the first time they're going to face someone that's, holy cow, as good as them or better than them, right? And then they get to the Alabamas and the Ohio States and the Michigans and the Texas and all these great schools, and all of a sudden they're like, holy cow, everyone's good here, and I'm third string. And I'm 4th string, and I'm not playing. And then ultimately, instead of fighting to get better and to win a starting job, or maybe win a special teams role, or going to your coach saying, coach, what do I need to do to get better, to get playing time? What happens? They all bail and go to the transfer portal. And it drives me nuts, because that's what we're teaching them, that it's not them, it's someone else. And when the going gets tough, I'm just going to leave. I'll go to another team. And ultimately, what happens is there's thousands of kids in the portal with nowhere to go, because there's only so many scholarships. So that's just, I'll get off my soapbox. So that was
you bring up a great point. Sometimes it works out, but a lot of times it's their way of learning. Like, hey, maybe it wasn't so bad where I was before. And it's, as you talked about, a lot of life lessons. That's one right there. And as you wrap up this conversation, I know you said when we started this conversation that there are only certain times when your daughters will listen to you. I got a feeling, knowing the way in which you lead by your actions, they're not putting you in the transfer portal as a dad. Rene Ingoglia, I'm Bryan Fenley. Thanks so much, man, for doing this. This was so much fun.
It was fun. Thank you, Brian.